Hello, hello! Today I will be featuring the Tier 8 Italian upcoming premium battleship, the Roma. The matchmaking is less than ideal. We are facing Tier 9 matchmaking. I mean, there's like two Tier 7s, but the majority of them are Tier 9, which is of course less than ideal, but something you will face quite a lot. I mean, when you play Tier 8, you do face more higher tiers than you do face lower tiers. The rare times you face tier 6s are of course easy face roll times, but most of the time you're going to be up tiered, and that's just the way it works. Now a Cyclone is announced, which is actually less than ideal for this ship. I mean, in general, battleships kind of love Cyclones because it allows you to open up on unsuspecting foes at close distances, and it removes the advantages of concealment and such from cruisers, which of course makes it really rough for cruisers. But that's for the Roma, it's not necessarily that much of an advantage. Anyway, I'll return to that a bit later. The HP pool is 65.4k. This is quite good. The Amagi sits at 66.3k, the NC sits at 66k, so 65.4 is pretty damn average. I mean, you can't really complain about having 600 less health when you have so much health. Now, one of the reasons why I mentioned that this Cyclone isn't really the best thing is because the citadel on the ship actually extends a fair amount above the waterline. Now, for example, the Monarch has an underwater citadel. The NC has a waterline citadel, whereas the Roma quite clearly has a citadel that comes up above the waterline, which means, of course, in close quarters brawling, this citadel is very vulnerable. It also has no turtleback to protect it, like for example the Amagi or the Bismarck or the Tirpitz, so once again, full broadside, quite vulnerable. However, the armor on this ship is excellent, absolutely excellent. The broadside armor, the broadside belt, is 375 millimeters, which is very impressive because many of the similar tier ships have around 300. Like for example, the NC has a 305 millimeter belt armor, so 375 is very good. In fact, the Große Kurfürst has a belt armor of 380, so you are almost matching the Kurfürst in belt armor at tier 8. So the weakness of the Citadel kind of gets covered by the fact that your armor is very good. And it doesn't just stop at the belt armor. Your bow and stern is 32 millimeters, which is of course very common. But the upper belt, meaning the broadside belt armor that extends from the actual citadel belt all the way to the deck, is 70 millimeters, which means not only is it going to be immune to HE, it also can't be overmatched by the likes of Yamato. This of course means you can angle against the Yamato and be extremely tanky in this thing. There is a bit of a stepped armor. If you look at the back of the ship behind the back turret, there's like this step up which provides a flat surface for targets to hit. I've been kind of trying to see if someone could hit me there and if it would provide that much of a weakness, but ultimately it's such a small target, and even if someone hits there, it's just really a penetration. In close range brawling, once again, it could become a bit of an issue, but it's such a small target that it's unlikely you will be eating too much of a damage in that part. Now, the central deck is 45. Secondary is 40, as I mentioned. There's some parts of the superstructure is also 45 millimeters. So honestly, the amount of HE damage you can actually deal to this ship is pretty limited. It's mostly bow, stern, and certain parts of the superstructure. So it's quite resistant to any sort of incoming IFHE spam. So this ship is straight up very tanky. Even the torpedo belt is impressive. It's got a 40% torpedo belt damage reduction. In comparison, the Amagi sits at 45, Bismarck at 24, NC at 21. So sitting at 40% is very impressive. The concealment is also actually, I think the concealment might be one of the things that I considered a bit too overtuned on this ship. I don't think it quite needs as much concealment as it has. The Amagi, with a full stealth build, can reach 13 kilometers of concealment. The NC, which is known for being an extremely stealthy battleship, can reach a very impressive 11.8 kilometers. The Roma can reach 11.2 kilometers of stealth. Now this I feel is a bit too much, because it pretty much matches the Kutuzov. The Kutuzov reaches 11.1 with a full concealment build. This one reaches 11.2, which for a battleship is pretty damn stupid. It also of course means that it outspots half the tier 10 cruisers and gets very close to matching the Des Moines in spotting distance. Des Moines reaches 10.6, I think. So yeah, it's getting a bit too much, and that's one of the things I have an issue with the Roma. I don't think it needs quite that much of a concealment, because as I just mentioned, the HP pool is average, the armor is excellent, the torpedo belt is excellent. So why exactly does it need to have the absolute best concealment? I think that's a bit too much. Anyway, moving on to speed. The ship is actually quite fast. It matches the Amagi at 31.5 if you run the speed flag, and the Amagi is of course among the fastest. This means it beats the Monarch, the Bismarck, the NC, the various tier 8 premiums. It beats them all in speed. So it shares the speediest spot with the Amagi. The turning circle, 810 meters, which is quite good. By the way, did you notice how much damage I did to that Bismarck shooting at this broadside? I just want to highlight this briefly here as an example of how incredibly troll these guns are. You saw that the Bismarck, I did like 10-11k volleys to him all the time, and that was a Bismarck that was moving, angling, and trying to dodge. Now in front of me, I'm using this as an example, in front of me we have an AFK Gneisenau. I think he's DC'd or something similar. He's giving a flat, perfect broadside, not moving. I line up perfect shot on the middle of his ship and I fire. And looking at damage, we have 43.3, 5k damage. And I shoot at him again soon after, and it repeats itself. The guns are extremely trollish, and I just briefly highlighted it here between to give you an idea of when I returned to this issue, because this is one of the major balancing issues for the Roma, or one of the reasons why I don't straight up consider it overpowered, is because how incredibly inconsistent these guns are. Anyway, moving on. I was talking about the maneuverability. The turning circle is 810 meters. This is pretty damn good actually. Amagi has a rough one, 870. Bismarck struggles at 850. The nimble North Carolina can get down to 760. So 810, pretty damn good. It's among the top echelons of tier 8 battleship maneuverability. The rudder shift is really good as well. You can 15.6 stock. Thanks to the great concealment though, I've gotten away with running rudder shift module instead of tankiness module, which means I've gotten rudder shift down to 12.5 seconds. So it almost feels kind of like a bit clunkier cruiser, which is pretty impressive. A 15.6 rudder shift base is very good though. Both the Amagi and the North Carolina sit at 17.3. So your rudder shift is already better than them. And the only one who could match you in speed, the Amagi, loses in both turning circle significantly and in rudder shift. So this thing handles great, amazing concealment, very well armored. So this is of course one of the reasons why I consider the concealment a bit too much, because when you handle this well and you got this armor this good, you don't really need such insane concealment. It does have some significant weaknesses, one of them being AA though. The AA is bad. It's straight up. The initial values are quite low. I think they're among the lowest of the tier. And the range is terrible. Your long range guns are only 4 kilometers, which means even if you've tried to build full AA, meaning AA range and AFT and such, your range is still going to be sad. So AA is going to be a huge issue, especially now with the kind of ridiculous buff to Midway. For example, Midway in its current state is actually quite broken, because I think they overbuffed the Midway significantly. So facing Midway, for example, you're just free kill against the Midway. It doesn't matter how you build your ship, you're still just going to be a free kill. Still though, AA is a weakness. And finally, we have the guns. Now, I mentioned earlier that the guns are extremely troll, and this is a very consistent issue with these guns. You have three 381mm guns. They have a 30-second reload, which is pretty much the same as you have across the board, or it's the most common reload value, 30 seconds. The shell velocity is actually pretty respectable on the AP, 850 meters per second, significantly faster than, for example, the NC. The HE has a shell velocity of 880, which is very fast, but the HE is pretty damn bad. It has only a 24% fire chance, and it deals 5.1k alpha damage. Now, for comparison, if you take the insane Monarch, the Monarch deals 6.3k alpha with a 35% fire chance. Amagi deals 6.5k alpha with a 30% fire chance. So these guys are breaking well over 6,000 damage per shell, whereas you're dealing 5.1k with a significantly less fire chance. So obviously the HE is going to see very little use because it is much weaker than the competition. The AP pen though is, as I mentioned, really random. The AP alpha is 12k, which is pretty expected for 381 mil. I think the Bismarck with 380 sits at like 11.9k, so pretty much what you might expect. A bit better maybe. But considering your reload is still 30 seconds, it means of course in raw alpha damage and in raw DPM you're losing out to the IGN and the USN lines. Because, well, identical reload but smaller caliber, pretty obvious. What it ultimately comes down to is gun performance. And gun performance is weird. Now the range is 18.1 kilometers, which is pretty damn bad. Honestly, it's 18.1 kilometers would be fine for a battleship if all the other battleships were also limited in the same way, but the problem is they're not. So when you end up against tier 10s and you deal with 18.1 kilometer range, you kinda struggle. So having the spotter plane is kind of a necessity on this thing. But the biggest issue really is the complete inconsistency of these guns. I mentioned shooting the full broadside was it Gneisenau earlier? And I mentioned that as an example. I shot 2 full volleys at his full broadside, and I think the combined damage I did was something like 8,000. And that is kind of sums up this ship. And then now you saw I fought some cruisers and I just completely blapped them off the face of the earth. So, but that was mostly thanks to Cyclone allowing me to close the distance. I did mention Cyclone is of questionable value for this ship because battleships in general benefit greatly from Cyclone because they can sneak up on their targets. The Roma, on the other hand, loses its advantages in concealment, and because of the heightened citadel, brawling multiple targets is pretty damn nasty because if you get broadside, you will get citadeled. However, the guns are something I've been really like trying to figure out, and I've had such issues trying to figure them out. They make so little sense to me. I have citadeled a slightly angled Yamato in like close quarters fights, but I have also shot a pretty much full broadside Hindenburg and gotten 5 bounces. So the consistency of these guns, I don't understand them. At times they seem to have excellent penetration, on other times they seem to have completely terrible auto bounce angles, where if you just happen to get past the auto bounce angle, then you just do no damage and you struggle to pen. For example, shooting this on these Missouris, I've noticed that shooting the upper superstructure is much better than even attempting to go for the citadel. Every time I try to go for some sort of citadels or like close quarters pens on citadels on other battleships, unless you're getting a full broadside, you're going to be getting a lot of bounces. I think it has something to do with the auto bounce angles. I haven't actually checked out the values, but you saw there an example. You will not be penning easily, and just going for the superstructure is mostly the best way. You might notice, by the way, the armor is of course excellent. I tanked a lot of volleys there with that belt armor and that forward extending. Wow, still bouncing. At this point, like, do I even want to go for the citadel? I'm going for the front bow now, and here we're finally getting some penetrations. But the gun performance is extremely inconsistent. Both the dispersion and the penetration is something I've really struggled to understand and to make work. And really, the guns being this inconsistent is probably the only reason why I don't consider the Roma to be a bit overpowered. I think they should tone down the concealment a bit. It doesn't need to be 11.2. I think it could match the NC at 11.8. That's already really, really good. And I don't think it needs to be any better than that. But because I'm trying to explain the guns, but the problem is I don't really understand the guns myself either. They are just simply inconsistent. It's kind of like Tirpitz or Bismarck guns, is that you never really know what you're going to get from them. They are extremely random. Now, this game, ideally I would like to sail past him at Black Pit Citadel, but the problem is the Rune and the Neptune, they've killed the competition, and they're about to open up fire on me. And 2 tier 9 cruisers will melt me extremely quickly, so I decide my best option here is, instead of me just dying and not doing anything in return, I decide to ram the Iowa and take him with him. Ideally, of course, my 2 cruisers should have been pushing in with me, but my 2 cruisers are running away. The enemy has 950 points and 3 capture points, which means the only only chance of winning a game is to charge into the enemy and get the kills, because we need points. Instead though, my team ignored basically me pushing in and tanking for them, and they're running away, which has a 0% chance of resulting in victory. This is very common, of course. It is weekend, and it's a weekend after a major patch, so every potato and their brother is going to be playing the game, and that's why you get decision making like this, and the game does end in a defeat. 185k damage. This was certainly one of the better Roma games, but I've never really had that terrible of a Roma game. I mean, I've had some with some midway. I had like a fanboy midway who was focus firing me, but those are kind of odd situations, and I don't think any tier 8, perhaps with the exception being the NC with a full AA build, could really deal with being focus fired by a midway. But other than that, the ship is good. The Roma is a very good ship. It's very trolly, the guns are extremely trolly, but the armor is excellent. The concealment is perhaps a bit too good. The handling is really good. I mean, it's among the fastest, among the best turning, among the best rudder shift. Just very, very good handling in every possible way. If we look at the team score, 1.7k, but still of course a loss. Taga and Neptune of course survived because they decided to run away as the enemy was gaining a lot of points, which doesn't really make much sense to me, but hey, whatever. If we look at detailed report, 1.6 million potential, you can easily get a lot more. I've easily broken way past 2 million potential damage in this ship, so tankiness is not an issue. As long as you don't give full broadside to people, this thing is incredibly tanky, both against AP and against HE. So nose-in tanking, you can easily tank Yamato shells. I've done a lot of that. As long as you don't give perfect nose so he can overmatch it, I've had no issues straight up brawling Yamatos, and they have struggled to do any damage to me. And that makes the armor scheme extremely, extremely impressive. Damage-wise though, majority is naturally, of course, from the guns, a bit of ramming damage there at the end. Overall though, damage received 101k before I went down to the ram. Could have probably tanked significantly more if I'd let the heal tick up a bit more, but we were pressed for time and I was being shot at by 2 tier 9 cruisers, so I had to make a snap decision. If it was the best one, that can certainly be debated. Anyway, let me show you guys, well, first of all, let me show you what the Citadel on this ship looks like, what the armor looks like, and what my recommended build on this ship is like. Right, now before I start showing my build, I might as well first of all highlight the armor that I mentioned quite a bit. As I mentioned, 32mm bow and stern, which is very common. This is pretty much what all battleships at this tier and even higher has. What is important though, or the things that I've considered noteworthy, is first of all the deck armor, 45, secondary is 40, and random superstructure armor for 60 here. So you can see the actual parts that you can damage with lower caliber IFHE is pretty much only the blue parts. So it's fairly resistant to any sort of HE spam. Other things worth noting, the broadside armor is excellent. The armor belt is thick and it extends far below and above the Citadel. So this is a lot of tankiness. In comparison, if we take for example the NC, we can see we're sitting at 305 here. In comparison, the Roma is sitting at a nice 375. Also, the armor belt extends far up all the way to the deck armor. 70 millimeters means you cannot be overmatched even by the Yamato. So if you angle against the Yamato with this thing, as I mentioned, when you get this armor angled against it, well, it's very unlikely you will be eating much damage at all, as his only hopes are in penetrating the fore-end plating and then reaching your citadel from there. Mentioning the citadel, it's behind layered armor. And as you can see, it does extend above the water. I mean, if you compare it, for example, to the Monarch. Let's see. You can see this is Citadel. This down here is Monarch Citadel. So as you can see, this thing is almost impossible to hit. Whereas the Roma Citadel quite clearly extends far above the waterline. So a significantly more vulnerable Citadel, I think. Even NC has a lower Citadel. Yeah, NC has a lower Citadel. It's right at the waterline. Whereas, of course, Roma's, as you can see, extends quite a bit. So this is something to keep in mind. Even though the turret traverse and the armor make it appear like a good brawling ship, this citadel weakness must be considered, especially since there's no turtleback to protect it. Just a lot of thick armor that you need to angle. And of course, thickness of armor is significantly less valuable in brawling situations, because the closer you get, the much more impressive the battleship penetration gets, which means close range, you will get citadeled by same and even lower tiers. Anyway, moving on. Module wise, well, consumable wise, if you can afford it, of course, premium repair, premium heal, and I run spotter plane to be able to extend the range and shoot into smoke, because as I mentioned, the default range of 18.1 is pretty anemic, especially when facing tier 10s. Upgrade wise, turret survival, I did mention it, but I might as well mention it here. The side armor on the turrets is very, very low. 130 millimeters is not impressive if you compare it to something like an Amagi, who sits at a nice chunky 280 millimeter side armor on the turrets. You understand why having 130 is very, very squishy. So turret survival, additional tankiness, better dispersion on the main guns. These guns are so troll. This is pretty much a must-have. Faster rudder shift. I feel you can get away with it because the concealment is so good, so you don't actually need damage control system mod 2. And finally, concealment. Concealment is one of your strengths. You want to build upon this strength. Captain perks wise, I'm not entirely... Well, I'll get to it towards the end. I'm not entirely convinced about the build, but first of all, preventive maintenance. Once again, turret survival. AR, it should be your first pick because your turret traverse is so good. Follow that up by Superintendent, Concealment Expert, and Fire Prevention. You're already very resistant to pure HE damage. Now you got to make sure you're resistant to fire as well, since they are different. Vigilance, especially with deep water torps popping up. I mean, it doesn't help much, but every little bit helps against them because they are so ridiculously strong. And now we have 2 points left. Now there's some options here. I considered Expert Loader, but ultimately you don't really want to use the HE too much because it is pretty damn bad. But Expert Loader, maybe. The only reason I would go for Expert Loader is just so I could get priority target, meaning I would put these 2 points into something else. These are the 2 points that I'm not convinced on. Expert Marksman is not that valuable on this ship because the default turret traverse is already 30 seconds. So cutting it down to 26.9 is only a 3.1 second advantage. So ultimately, Expert Marksman is kind of a flex pick. You could just as well pick Jack of all trades, High Alert, or maybe go into some double spotter plane plus priority target kind of build. That might be better. So I'm not entirely sold on this Expert Marksman. I'm only running it for now because I quite enjoy having a turret like or cruiser like turret traverse on my ship. But this final 2 points is something still a work in progress, and I think there's quite a lot of flexibility. I'm not convinced there's some best build for these last 2 points. I think you have a lot of options on what you want to build here. Flag-wise, of course, standard battleship. Well, I can show you the guys. This is the default camo. It gives you the standard things, which is 50% XP, and it looks absolutely awesome, which is why I've been using it a lot instead of using some custom camo. Signal-wise, healing, fire prevention, faster consumable usage, speed. Pretty basic things. You can increase your AA if you want, but honestly the AA is pretty damn underwhelming. As I mentioned, the AA, the range plus base damage is not really much to brag about, and regardless of how much you buff it, you're still not going to be competing with any of your brothers slash sisters at the same tier. Anyway, that was my Roma commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys later.